Okay, Pelayo, I think that you are mute. I don't know if you was trying to say something before to.
I was just trying to like pass the floor to you. I think I just muted everybody.
Okay.
And welcome everybody on behalf of the UNITAR to this fourth session on SG5, which Paloma will be moderating also with Rangita, and they will be guiding us throughout the whole day. So thank you,
Okay.
Paloma, once again for joining us for this last session today.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I don't know if Rangita wanted to say something. I have the impression that. Pelayo, can we unmute
Yes, I'm trying to
Rangita?
click on the
Because I
unmute
don't know
for
if she wants
Rangita.
to.
There you go.
Okay.
Now we can hear you.
Rangita? Okay.
No,
Okay.
go ahead. I think
Okay.
Palayo muted me, so I was just saying to unmute.
Okay.
Perfect. Now we can hear you.
Yeah, we need Rangita because I mean, good afternoon and good morning and good night to everybody. And thank you for being really insistent with us, because the majority of you already participated in the previous 3 days. So as Professor Rangita de Silva already explained, we started the first day with the work of the Platform for Action. Then we moved to CEDAW. Yesterday, we have a very interesting conversation about women, peace and security. And today we are going to the SDG 5, which is, of course, not the last step, but one important one, especially in the COVID crisis. So, you know that this morning I was just checking the last data that we have about the implementation of the SDG 5. Unfortunately, one of the main problems that even the Secretary General Guterres already underlined is the lack of current data about the impact of COVID, especially in the implementation of SDG 5, especially because according with the information prepared by the UN and also the World Bank, with 122 countries, the pandemic affected the operations of the vast majority of national statistical offices, meaning that 65% of the headquarters working on statistics are already closed. 90% of the staff, globally speaking, is working from home, and 96% have partially or fully stopped face-to-face data collection, which means that, of course, all the things that we can do about the implementation of the SDG 5, we need to do it just taking into account this reference. And also, I think that with the last report published by the UN related to the implementation of the SDGs, the last one, as you know, it was published in December 2020. The information about the data on implementation of the SDG 5 is really not very positive. Unfortunately, before and after the COVID, the situation is completely different. Before the COVID, in general terms, there are some areas where we have some improvement, especially in the participation of women in the political processes, which I think is positive, and also in the side of education. But unfortunately, after the COVID, what happened is that there are some areas really, I mean, that really worry the situation of, especially of SDG 5. After the COVID, the confirmation we have is on the area of violence against women or gender-based violence. Only 40% of women who experience violence report the crime or seek for help. Only 40%, which is really scary. Unfortunately, also the data confirm the reduction in the access to services due to the closure of services because the pandemic, and something similar happened with child marriage and also female genital mutilation. And also it happens the same thing with the unpaid work, especially because the closure of many of the services and the daycare services, women are doing much more work related to domestic obligations or domestic responsibilities, if you like. And you know, if we combine this information with the information related to the implementation of the SDG 10 related to inequalities, one of the main concerns in SDG 10 is precisely the impact on women with disabilities, where they are facing, precisely because the concerns on inequalities, they are facing multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, and also is affecting migrants and refugees, especially women and girls. So it means that really the picture is not very positive, but at the same time, the Secretary General during the last statement in the beginning of the year just recall for the, for this proposal to building back better using the principles of the SDGs as the center of all the policies and decisions and works and programs that we can implement. So I think that even with all the negative things, we need also to look forward. And the idea of the meeting today is just to see first how in one specific country the government is really implementing specific policies. I hope that at some point we will have with us Ambassador Pieris, thanks to Rangita, who is the representative of Sri Lanka in the UN, but I think that still he's in another meeting and waiting for him. And in the meantime, we are going to start with another two guests that we have today. We have with us today Ana Maria Salazar, who is the former vice president of the University Rey Juan Carlos, but I think that she has a lot of experience in the field, working in Africa in many countries, but also in Vietnam and in Egypt, where she led all the programs on gender-based violence in the MENA region with the Spanish Agency for Cooperation. And also she was working in UN Women for some time, and also she was a consultant with the OECD in the area of sexual exploitation and abuse. And also we are going to have with us today Tony Cole, who is the founder and former CEO Sahara Group, now in Oxford University in the School of Government. And according with the New African, is one of the top 10 influential Africans alive. He decided last year, a year and a half ago, just to move to the political side and try to participate in the political process in his country. He was working with the UN on the advisory group for the private sector in the implementation of the SDGs, and at the same time he's also contributing with many NGOs working in Nigeria mainly, and also in Africa, trying to improve the situation of women and girls there. So I think that maybe, I don't know, Rangita, if you would like to add something before to start the discussion. Okay,
Yeah,
so you know, the first thing that I really have in my mind is, I think that maybe both of you, Ana Maria and also Tony, that by the way, thank you so much for your time today with us. I think that the first question really is, with this picture, which is not very positive, what do you think that are the main challenges and trends in order to implement the SDG 5 and also to improve the life of women and girls in the current situation, in the process of building back better? I don't know if maybe Ana Maria, you would like to start, and then we can move to Tony.
Okay, thank you very much, Paloma, and hello to everybody. I met Tony a long time ago in Spain. It was fantastic, and Rangita as well in New York, and in New York at least 2 or 3 times, and always it was a fantastic interactive conversation. I think just to start to put, of course, Paloma always is in the target of promoting actions, try to put in touch people with something interesting to say. And especially after your time, Paloma, and OECD, for me, it was one of the most interesting influencers as well. Let me tell you that you are an influencer as well, Paloma.
Not as Tony, not as Tony. Still
Yeah, not
process.
as Tony, yeah, but in different field, but of course an influencer, because this incredible and important SDG. Always we are talking around these days. You have I was connected as much as I could in touching with very interesting expert the situation. But you know what's happened, Paloma, that I don't know what the other person feeling, you know, but I feel that after many years working on that, a lot of battles play and so on, is still something that we need to explain why, you know, and we need to explain why it's so important. And this is for me is a type of I don't know, a type of frustration. And what this is why also I said it's very interesting that men like Tony come into the policy, because I think the countries, the government is the one of the big lacks that we have. This is no way about it. And I was talking the other day with a colleague about the Beijing, and she was there as well. And we were talking about the maybe today, Beijing, we will not be so successful. Probably in that time, everybody was awareness about it, a lot of hope about future and so on. And I think some countries probably will not participate on that. If the Beijing will be happening today, I think the results will be completely different and worse, in my opinion. An opinion of a lot of because some countries I don't think they are going to go so far as they were in that time. Well, it's a personal feeling, but working in the Middle East and in some Arab countries, sincerely speaking, the human rights for women are all the time under the question. You know, you need to all the time create the frame, all the time give explanation. Something obviously is not good, something we are not doing well still. And I don't know what is going on now. Something happened.
No, it's okay.
But okay,
I think that
I would like to put this first topic on top of the table, maybe controversial, but and also what is the role that the international organization could play to help in this sense, not only create a lot of debate, but create concrete things, you know. And in this case, the OECD, and you know this very well, Paloma, recently got a recommendation for the countries that I think is one of the most innovative things that has to be done in abuse and harassment, sexual exploitation in development and human work, you know. And this is something that we need to, I would like to get the approach from these two areas. The situation in some countries didn't improve. Beijing was a beautiful moment, but now the situation, which one is the situation? And also, what is the role that the international organization should follow, in my opinion, the interesting initiative that the OECD has done. And it's something that you have a lot of things to do in that, Paloma. Let me tell you, because you are not going to tell that. And I have to tell, you were a real promoter on that.
Okay. Thank you, Ana Maria. But you know, I think that maybe, I mean, you are touching really two important things that are probably more general. But I would like, Tony, if maybe you like to go more maybe to the SDG 5 as such, because
Okay.
of course I think that what Ana Maria mentioned are two things that are important for the implementation of the SDGs. But I would like to listen from your side, Tony, and your experience in Nigeria. What do you think that are the main challenges really in order to implement the SDG 5 and to improve the situation? Because the implementation means also to improve the situation of women and girls.
And thank you very much, Paloma, Ranjita, Anna Maria, and everyone here. It's such a big pleasure to be here. Only Paloma can drag me out of where I am right now to sit down in a suit and tie and speak at this point in time. Myself and Ranjita have this ability to do so. But one of the topics that they know always gets to me is this whole topic about gender and what men can do. And so every single time they want to bring me out of the woodworks, they just drop this whole thing about gender and what are men doing and what's my position on it. Because truly, I believe it's something that is extremely important. So to your point, Paloma, what are the gaps that we have seen over the years? And there are three main things. I discussed this with Ranjita the last time that I was on her program, and it hasn't changed much. So there are 3 R's that we talk about when it comes to women. And the first one is rights, women rights, the rights, talking about the rights that they have as women. The second one is representation, women representation in politics, in business, within the society and all of that. How are they represented? That's the second R. And the third R is resources, women's access to money, to resources, getting bank loans, getting grants, and just getting basic needs that they can access to do the business that they must do. Now, when you compare these 3 R's with the 3 R's for men, you find out that when it comes to rights, especially now I'm speaking within the context of Nigeria and Africa, but I also know that we see this in Asia and across the world in many places. You find that when it comes to rights that are given to men and rights that are given to women, there's a disparity in it. And that's why the SDG 5 is important, because it has to close that gap. You see that when it comes to representation in business, in politics, in social status, there's a disparity between representation that men have and representation that women have. And again, we have to close this. And finally, when it comes to access to money, we've had a lot of arguments about pay disparity. You pay men different from what you pay women. You find that men can go into the banks, get grants for research and so on, and you find that it's a lot more difficult for women. So these are 3 things that you have to close. So I will keep that on one side because that hasn't changed, and this is something that we must continue to look at. Now, the flip side of all of this is how can this change and what can we do to change it? For a long time, we've had women pursuing the cause on their own. The issue of gender and advocacy has been driven to a large extent by women. Anna Maria talked about the Beijing conference that was driven also by women. And the realization today is that it's a joint effort. Both women and men have to come together, and more men must come to the table to drive the agenda if it's ever going to change. And so the he for she movement that the UN drove is a very, very important movement to close the gap. You need to have minimum men, especially again coming back to Nigeria and Africa, minimum men driving these 3 positions to move forward. And you talked about COVID, but let me hold this 2 first so that we can have the conversation. But I saw a major shift that happened in 2020 when it came to women coming to the forefront. And I would like to come back to that as we go along, as to what the role that women played in Nigeria within the COVID time and post-pandemic issues that arose in Nigeria. Thank you.
Okay, so, I think that maybe because the conversation really can be very broad, I think that maybe we need to focus in the case of the SDG 5 implementation, like in 2 main things. One, I think that is the potential challenges, as you mentioned, Tony, in order to implement the SDG 5. But then we need also to take into account what happened before and after the COVID, because the reality is that we mentioned that yesterday, 70% of the workers in the health area are women. So they are really in the first front of the battle against COVID.
Yep.
Second, they are accepting many responsibilities that, I mean, because the lack of services, so we need to do something with that. So it's like, you know, how can we balance the work on the implementation of the SDG 5 at the same time that we give a response to the COVID situation? So
Okay.
I don't know if maybe before, Rangita, you can introduce, because I think that we have the Ambassador Pires with us.
Okay, so
And
because
maybe you can
Ambassador has to
introduce him.
leave immediately. So
Okay, go ahead.
Ambassador Pires, we are honored to have you join us at this auspicious day when we are discussing the impact of the Sustainable Development Goal, Goal 5 on gender equality and women's empowerment on the global community at a time of an existential crisis, the biggest crisis humanity has ever faced, the global pandemic. And at this point of time, at this moment in history, we are seeing a reversal of the progress that have been made over the last 5 years on the Sustainable Development Goals. So as we see this rollback of the progress, there is a great effort by governments to stem the tide of this reversal. So Ambassador, as the permanent representative of Sri Lanka at the United Nations, can you share with us your thoughts on the impact of the Sustainable Development Goals in building back better in a post-COVID world? Because it is important to make sure that women and girls are central to all global recovery plans and in the sustainability of the recovery and the stimulus packages. Thank you, Ambassador, for joining us. And I know that you have another meeting with the Korean ambassador. So I would like you to share your thoughts with us, because it is so important for us as we have with us 117 young leaders and diplomats from around the world, from Afghanistan to Australia to Zimbabwe to Zambia, to understand the ways in which governments, NGOs, multilaterals like the OECD and the United Nations are building sustainability in a world that is in crisis.
Thank you. Thank you, Rangita and UNITAR for inviting me this morning to throw up some ideas at this very important discourse that you have undertaken. I must say that I have a little more time than I thought I would have, because I had some sad news just 10 minutes ago from the Korean ambassador that one of his staff had succumbed to COVID, and we have had to postpone our luncheon meeting. So I can take my time, a little time with you, at least relax a little bit without rushing this very important topic through. Thanks once again. Now, let me...
So I wanted to, Ambassador Pires, I also want to share with our eminent panelists as well as the participants that you are not only a diplomat, but you're a jurist. You served as the Attorney General and the Chief Justice of Sri Lanka, and you have gained eminence around the world as someone who is a legal scholar and a jurist.
Okay. I'm delighted at all these lovely things that Rangita says of me. I really would like to probably be not known as a great jurist or a diplomat or a senior public servant, although I have had 45 years of the law rub off on me. And that's 45 years. This is my 45th year in the profession. And I've had some exciting times. But having said all that, I think the biggest problem today we have in the world in approaching all kinds of problems is that there's too much of jurisprudence in it, quite frankly. We are losing the human angle at looking at these issues. So I like to be known as a simple man, a humanist who loves humanity. That's what I would love to be remembered for, rather than perhaps the jurist in me, or perhaps the diplomat in me. Having said that, so pardon me for saying it, but I did say this. I echoed the same ethos a few days ago in the United Nations organization when I had to make a statement that we are so quick to be very juristic in our approaches to real human problems. And that's where really the problem begins. That's where really the problem begins. Now, let's leave that aside for a moment and permit me the indulgence of focusing on Sri Lanka's posturing on the SDGs, and particularly SDG 5, and on the SDGs and how we've tackled it in the context of the pandemic. Permit me to call you, my dear friends. Sri Lanka has set its own national development targets, driven by the global level of ambition, but taking into account the national context, our priorities, and the circumstances that we are in. The national policy framework has been captured in a nice little program which has been titled Vistas of Prosperity and Splendor. It was a brainchild of our president, our new president. Vistas of Prosperity and Splendor, formulated after extensive consultation with diverse stakeholders, including the public, effectively integrating our global SDGs commitments and reflecting considerable policy alignment. Now, in this process, the government has restructured, you probably know, the entire cabinet of ministers, having regard to this new ethos that the SDGs bring, to achieve the SDGs by 2030. Now, and looking towards further strengthening the institutional mechanism for horizontal and vertical coordination, for planning, implementation, and the monitoring of the whole process. Now, I must confess that the want of data on SDG indicators remain one of the, perhaps the most greatest challenges in this process. And the SDG, we have the Sustainable Development Council, together with the Department of Census and Statistics, is in the process now of strengthening the statistical capacities of the national institutions. And the SDG portal launched by this council is an integrated reporting mechanism promoting a whole of government approach, a very holistic whole of government approach to the collection of data, management, and the sharing of that data. So, my dear friends, the socio-economic impacts of COVID-19 will perhaps be the greatest challenge for Sri Lanka in achieving progress towards the SDGs. And of course, the funding gap of the SDGs currently, which is estimated at perhaps approximately about 2.2 to 4 billion per year by the United Nations, of course, is likely to be further, in my view, widened due to the contraction, naturally, of inflation of the economy due to the pandemic. And that's perhaps pretty natural to expect. So having said that, Sri Lanka has made remarkable progress in controlling the spread of the pandemic, as you know, through very strict implementation of health and the guidelines that we practice here. And as a result, we have recorded a very low death rate of 0.45% and a high recovery rate. Now, I'm not trying to sing praise about Sri Lanka, not at all, in the context. But before I deal with the matter in question. So let me, actually, it might interest you to know that Sri Lanka has managed to reduce poverty. And the head count ratio is about 4.1%. It was just 2 years ago. It'll even shrink. It'll perhaps be lesser as we go on. However, the downturn in economic sectors, as I told you, such as tourism, apparels, and the SMEs, and the shrinking of the overseas labor markets that generated millions of employment opportunities to our people, are likely to take a severe hit, so to speak.
I want to
Now,
pause on that. I want to pause on that. The women migrant workers
yes,
bring a major
yes,
portion of the GDP. So how, and I think
right,
that's an important part, Paloma, that you and I have been focusing on, women migrant
exactly,
workers who work overseas
precisely,
and the impact that will have on the SDGs. So can you just focus
right,
on that point narrowly?
of course. Yes. Now, just on that particular point, you probably might be pleased to note that the pandemic has given a renewed opportunity to look inwards and increase domestic production to meet most of our consumption requirements, as well as to reorient Sri Lanka towards an export economy. Now, you will see that this will help Sri Lanka to bridge its budget as a result of the drop of revenues due to our migrant workers, who actually bring, perhaps they were the biggest earners for Sri Lanka at one time, by boosting our export earnings. The 2021 national budget, you will be happy to hear, contains extensive proposals to provide tax concessions to agriculture, fisheries, livestock, manufacturing, the construction sector, and at boosting domestic production. Now, a strong emphasis has been placed in attracting foreign direct investment via tax incentives. Now, the government has also taken, Rangika, you'll be pleased to note, special endeavors to induce household and business transition towards improved, for example, waste management practices and renewable energy usage. The national budget has has introduced so many measures. So achieving the SDG targets, particularly in the context of COVID-19, requires mutual cooperation.
Thank
now,
you. Thank you, Ambassador. And with that, I want to turn to Mr. Tony Cole, who's one of Nigeria's leading business icons. He's, through his business and entrepreneurship, has built Nigeria's economy, and he's now based in Oxford, and using his experience as a business leader to reflect on some of the theories that can be propounded on business. The Secretary General said recently, addressing the business leaders, "Let me start by a brutal sentence. Either the Sustainable Development Goals are fully assumed with enlightened self-interest by the business community, or they will just remain a nice exercise in diplomatic discussions in New York, or maybe by some governments." So we need the business input, and especially in terms of the goal 5. So Tony, back to you on the importance of business and entrepreneurship in addressing women's economic participation, women's leadership in building back better.
Absolutely. And thank you, Ambassador Mohan, for the update from Sri Lanka. Really, I appreciate that, especially the part of you reducing poverty. That's really important. And I want to start from the part of reducing poverty to answer Ranjita's question as to how business community can help with SDG 5 moving forward. I agree with the Secretary General on this point. It's extremely important, and that goes to the third R I was talking about on resources and access to resources. So from the business community, I would point out 3 ways in entrepreneurship. So the first aspect of it is that more women have to be empowered, and women coming into the entrepreneurial space is extremely important. So one of the things you're seeing today across board in Nigeria and in many other countries is that you're finding women entrepreneurs who are coming into the space, driving women-led businesses and competing at the same level with men in entrepreneurship, innovation, IT, tech, digital, and all that space. That's extremely important, and we need to encourage that and make sure that that goes on. So that's the first aspect, with women coming in on their own. The second aspect where women must play if we're going to end and close the gap on the SDGs is in representation at board levels. Many times we found out when we're looking for board memberships and finding people to come into the board, we did this for banks in Nigeria, on an African board for an African bank in Nigeria, looking at also at oil and gas companies. We found that it was extremely difficult to find women that have played at that level at the board level. So for most women here, this has to be encouraged. We need to lift up the profile of women to compete and take board positions, because at the board level, decisions are made. Remember, I said that there's an access to resources. At that board level, access to resources come in, and the opening that is required for women to get access to those resources happens at the board level. So very important that this must happen. The third level, again, where businesses play a big part is in the C-suite. How many, now where you have multinational companies and groups of companies, holding companies that have different subsidiaries, at the top of those subsidiaries, what positions do women hold? Now, we're not talking of the positions in HR, we're not talking of the positions as legal secretaries, we're now talking of the positions at CEO levels, chief operation officers, chief executive officers. Women have to begin to take that position, and this is a position that traditionally has been held a lot by men. But again, once you have the board and you have board representation and you have women coming into those positions, you lift that bar and you lift it tremendously. So we need to see these aspects as far as business is concerned. Three things, let me repeat. Board representation, very, very important. CEO level or C-suite level, but the decision makers at the C-suite level with board, it's very deliberate. Women must take that position. And then the last aspect of it, entrepreneurship, where women are driving their own businesses and running their own businesses. These are three positions that once you can hold that positions at that top level, it begins to encourage women to do a lot more and close the gap on the SDGs. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tony, and thank you so much, Ambassador. But precisely, I think that the Ambassador just remind us a very important thing, which is that the recognition, and this is something that we already discussed during the week, is that the recognition of the rights is not enough really to improve the life of the people. We need policies. So we can discuss really the need to have more people in business, more women in business, more women in leadership positions, in political participation, in many areas. But I think that part of this humanity approach that Ambassador mentioned is the access to basic rights. So I would like to hear also from you, how do you see the implementation of the SDG 5 when we are talking about the problems of many women and girls without any access to health, education, and employment? So I think that this is the first gap that we need to fix, and then maybe we can move to violence against women, which is another area where also we need to discuss. So I would like to listen from the three of you, Ana Maria, and also Ambassador and Tony. I would like to listen from your side. What do you think that we can do really in order to ensure this access to basic rights? Because unfortunately, as I mentioned in the beginning, in many countries, the problem is that women and girls don't have access to food and water and sanitation. And, I mean, we can talk about the leadership positions, which is an important thing. But once we already fix the situation of women without this access to humanity, if I can use your words, Ambassador. So I don't know, Ana Maria, maybe you want to start, and then we move to Ambassador and Tony.
Well, Paloma, I think all the rights for women, the basic right, as you say, we need to still fighting to get in some places or in some situations. But how we could move forward in more, in other situations when the violence is still the pandemic, the big pandemic for women. You know, I think this is at the beginning of everything. How we could work with these women that to empowerment them, to do things and so on when they are not safe. I think the violence against women is still an incredible big problem. It's a real pandemic around the world. And I don't know how we could, honestly, I think this is something to back from the beginning. The basic circumstance for a woman to be safe is the minimum to work with women. The minimum to work with women in economic empowerment, social empowerment, whatever. For instance, now we saw, and it's very clear, it still happened, according to all the measures, all the meetings, all the groups working on, and all the places where the decision making for the COVID, the gap for women is terrible. All women organizations are complaining about, we are not in the center of the taking of decisions. We are not in when it's more than clear, and everybody is agree on that the COVID has affected women more than men. And we are still very far from the right place, for the right place in the right moment. Then what does it mean that? It means that a big reflection has to be done about violence. I'm sorry about that, but maybe today I'm very focused because every day we have a lot of news about a woman who has lost their life in the hands of the men or whatever. But not only that, in the village, in the schools, for instance, the other day Rangita said that in Sierra Leone, I think so, it was now the young girls' pregnancy can go to the school. This is something that we saw, we had, for me, it was a fantastic news, but could you imagine what does it mean? It's so basic, the right for the woman is under the threat of a lot of things. In my opinion, education, protect everybody, but even more the poor people and women and girls. And we need to work in the origin of the big problem, because if I don't know, if a woman doesn't know what is the rights that they have, how can they fight on that? And I'm really worried, and this is a little bit aside the topic about nowadays the political regime became more and more demagogical, with more and more marketing around, and with all those things. But women still, even if they say women in the policies, this is not true. It's not on the budget. It's not, they don't reinforce women in the skills about new technologies and so on. And if we are in a place, in 5 days, we are going to be very, very far, even more, because the gap of a technology and the digitalization and so on is affecting a lot. Then
maybe
Okay,
Ana Maria, what we can do is just to discuss a little bit later about violence and new technologies, because I think that this is an important issue. But maybe now we can move to Ambassador Pierre, just to focus on this access to the basic rights for women and girls. Ambassador, you have the floor.
But sorry, Paloma.
Thank you very much. Yes. Now, you might actually want to know what Sri Lanka intends doing about this. Where are we going? Where do we intend to go? I have captured that whole, perhaps the whole trajectory of the policy in a few ideas. I think what we want to, first of all, ideally, and you might think that I'm a dreamer really, that we will embark on a program to try and end all forms of discrimination against all women and girls, perhaps all over the country. Now, that's a dreamy idea, no doubt, But that's something that we will certainly work towards. And mind you, we have enshrined that idea in the directive principles of state policy as enshrined in our constitution. And we have also enshrined it as a fundamental right that no one would ever be discriminated on the grounds of sex, of that person's sex. Secondly, we are working towards the elimination of all forms of violence, what we just now spoke about, against all women and girls in the public and private spheres, including the trafficking and sexual and other types of exploitation. We have in place a piece of statute called the Domestic Violence Act. Now, domestic violence is not something new to perhaps the global community. My considered personal view on this, it's a very patriarchal family system that we perhaps most of us enjoy. And we have this concept of the pater familias and the patria potestas, that the father of the family actually has the power over the family. Now, I'm not too sure whether we can reverse those roles, but certainly we need to have a better understanding of those roles. What is the new concept of the pater familias? Or what's the new concept of the patria potestas? I think we need to understand it. Now, where do we start it? I'm not too sure whether we can start teaching these values when people are 35 or 40 or 45. I think we need to impart these values straight in our schools, in our homes. In other words, a child who goes to school when he is 5 in his formative years must be taught to respect each other irrespective of gender. In other words, it must be part of our genetic makeup. We can't get it right otherwise. We can't teach someone what the difference is at 40, 45, no. But if it's part of our genetic makeup, and how do we do that? And that's to drill those ideas and values in our homes to start with, in our schools.
So, Ambassador, you made a very important point about male-headed households and how that is translated into law, into a common law system of patria potesta, that, you know, that there is an assumption that households are headed by men. And that is so relevant to the Sustainable Development Goal 5, where it talks about the importance of the shared responsibility within the household and the ways in which unpaired care and domestic work needs to be shared. So on your point, and to make it broader than Sri Lanka, we still have on our statute books around the world, 16 countries still require that women ask permission from their husbands to engage in economic participation. Several countries in the African region in their law provide for husband obedience. So what these countries do, for example, in the Algerian code, is that a wife needs to obey her husband as well as her parents-in-law. This is written into the family code in Algeria.
Of course, when I was drafting the National Action Plan on Human Rights, I had an NGO that appeared before the panel that was drafting the National Action Plan and said, look, we want to travel to the eastern province of your country, which is inhabited essentially of Muslim families, and said, look, the women have to get up at 3:30 in the morning and prepare the food for the husband to go out to the field, you know, wash the children, send them to school, and so on and so forth. And we need to change that. So I took a step back, took a deep breath and said, well, let's pause for a moment. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that we have got to, in this process, strike a balance. When I say a balance, I think those practices that you just now mentioned in some of those African countries, perhaps in this day and age, looks pretty archaic. Pretty archaic. Pretty archaic perhaps is a gentle word to use. Perhaps absolutely should be consigned as being relics of the past, perhaps. right, of modern day living. But having said that, to dismantle those structures is not easy. And that can come only through education. That's why I say that we need to actually tackle it right at the, it must be a bottoms up approach. It can't be a top down approach. It must be a bottoms up approach. So we need to tackle the problem.
And I think on the education aspect, Tonio has played a major role in the girl child's education. You have established women's ambassadors that can address girls' access to education, which I think is such an important point, because what we see, to the point that Ana Maria made about the escalation of violence against women, including the escalation of child marriage during the pandemic. And child marriage costs $60 billion annually, because over 750 million girls are married before their 18th birthday. So I think bringing together the mandatory education for girls is a vaccine against child marriage, is a vaccine against teenage pregnancy. And these are issues that are so integral and pivotal to achieving the sustainable development goals, all of the sustainable development goals, because they're inextricably interlinked, but especially goal 5. Tonio?
Sure. I think,
again,
I'm sorry.
So, okay. Thank you, Ambassador. And thank you for bringing this very important point down to education, both the formal and informal education. And especially when we look at some of the issues that have perpetuated over the last couple of years, at the bottom of the pyramid, one of the things that we have found out consistently is that the lack of education, and when we talk about education, we really mean being educated now, not getting into schools. So over the years, a lot of countries have gone through with the MDGs, gone through to building schools and getting people into the classroom. But we've seen over the years that even though they've gone into the classroom, they have not come out educated. And as a result of that, very little has changed in terms of closing the gap in the SDGs. And so that has led us to begin to question the second aspect of it, that how do you really get them educated? How do you get them educated to such a level that the gap begins to close? And that's where technology comes in, which I believe is something that Paloma is talking about. But two things before we get to the technology aspects. The first has to do with the fact that we have seen that there are many laws that have been put in place, but very little implementation of those laws. So it's one thing to have the laws, the legislation has been there. Many people over the last couple of years, many countries, over the last couple of years, have taken the issue of making the laws reflect gender, reflect equality, reflect even creating quotas that should allow more women to participate in government and all. But there has been a big gap in the implementation. And this is one part where the voices and the voices of the collective need to be raised. The implementation of laws that have been put in place in countries to close the gap is lacking. So if we really want to focus on closing that, the SDGs, the gaps in the SDGs, one of the things is to make sure that the implementation works. Whatever those laws are, let's start from there. The laws are in place. So let's start with taking the laws that are in place and making sure that there's an implementation of those laws as far as gender, as far as violence, as far as all the things we're talking about are concerned. Many countries already have the laws, but the implementation is lacking. So that's the first thing that we need to concentrate on. The second thing, then going down to the social issues of the SDG 5 and women in particular, falls squarely on the area of education, and we cannot take it lightly. It's something that is extremely important. How do you get them educated in the proper way? Informal education is very, very important, which means that we have to use some of the very basic tools of passing information today. 1, radio. 2, internet. So we need to focus a lot more in making sure that you get information in the hands through devices to people who are really in the rural communities and pass that information. There are two ways they get information today. They get information through the radios. They still use radios a lot, so we have to push that. And they get information through their smartphones or SMS, simple messages. How do you get education down that way such that formal education or informal education is passed through there? Then the second aspect of education, which we must focus on, is the education in the home. We've talked a lot about the mindset of people believing that the men, they have to, Rangita, thanks for that example, where women have to still take permission from husbands before they go to get things done. That has to change, but the only way you can change that is cultural. It's very difficult. So you have to change it over time. So this is a long game that we must play, where the education in the home begins to change. But who has the primary responsibility of changing the home front? And this is really where it becomes difficult. It's a joint and it's a shared responsibility. That much is true. But I tend to believe that I'm married and I have 3 children. And I know that to a large extent, to all the men in the house, I'm sorry, to a large extent, we do what our wives ask us to do. Many times, the wives practically control what happens in the home. So then it's such a misnomer when we hear that men are in control of the homes, because no, it's not. The women actually are in control to a large extent of what happens in the home and the education of the children. So while it's a joint responsibility, I believe that women have an even bigger role in ensuring that the mindset of daughters and the mindset of sons when they're growing up, their boys and girls, are not different. We must make sure that they bring them up in exactly the same way to be able to compete equally going out. One should not feel that it's my right, while the other feels that I have to wait till I get married before everything comes up. So there's a lot to change in there. But all of this must happen at an education level, informally and formally, right from the base. Thanks, Paloma.
Yeah, you are right, Tony, in many of the things that you mentioned. But I think that in order to change even the education at home, we also need the contribution from male, because sometimes in some countries, or because the history or because the culture, sometimes it's like the man are not responsible for that. And as you mentioned, we need to promote a joint responsibility, as it was declared in the Beijing Platform for Action and in all the political commitments that were approved in the UN. But I would like to go back to to 2 things that we mentioned before. One is the technologies that you mentioned, Tony, but also is the violence that Ana Maria mentioned before, because of course, as she says, this is one of the worst pandemics that many women and girls are suffering from all over the world. So I don't know, Ana Maria, if maybe you would like to talk a little bit about that, or even to explain your experience with the new recommendation on sexual exploitation and abuse, especially with the work that you did in UN Women and also in the OECD. As probably all of you are aware, a year and a half ago, the OECD approved a specific recommendation on sexual exploitation and abuse and harassment for women and girls in development and humanitarian work, trying to ensure that this is not something from forgive me to use this language, but from the north, because this is unfortunately a universal problem, and we need to fix it with all the tools from everybody. So I don't know, Ana Maria, if maybe you can illustrate a little bit, taking into account your experience in this specific area, and then maybe we can move to the new technologies, which is also another important challenge. Ana Maria, you are mute.
It's true. Well, I only want to say something before we move to the other topic. But in my opinion, the sexual exploitation and the violence against women and girls is one of the big threats also to get the agenda goals. all in general, not only the 5, this is my opinion. Well, the question is that when the countries face this tremendous problem, probably they have no enough instrument, they have not previous experience to face how to do and so on. And this is why, for me, it called my attention in a very interesting way, the work done by the OECD, because give one type of recommendation after recognize the real problem with a huge and important illustration about figures and so on, as Rangita mentioned before, how much does it cost per year, the terrible problem of early marriage, for instance, and so on. All those things are already very, very well identified. What the organization did, in my opinion, very important, is identified and the problem and development one type of recommendations which can help the countries to create local policies, because many times the local group of experts and so on, sometimes they are not open, or maybe they are not so ready to face the because it's an ugly situation, it's terrible, it's dramatic. And I think this is, in my opinion, one of the brave things, that because give an instrument, a methodology, and a guide for the countries to, in steps to follow how they develop local policies, internal policies, and how they should create instruments. For instance, only very, very, very fast, But the recommendation is based, for me, this is very important, in 6 pillars: policies, standard of professional conduct, organizational change, because as Tony said before, this is a problem in the private organization, in public organization, and so on. It's everywhere. Do leadership programs to face this. Also, to create a type of centers of instruments to help the victims in order to, when a person survives one violence, sometimes has more problems than before, and they cannot talk, they cannot explain. I remember in Egypt, for instance, women normally, they don't go to the police to denounce a physical harassment and violation, because in many cases, in most of the cases, they suffer more attacks. And this is something that is necessary to create special centers to help a special type of professionals to support these women in these traumatic moments. No? And I think according to this, they did training. For instance, we need another training in awareness, because some countries, they don't recognize internally, or is not politically correct, recognize that some types of violence against women. And with this guy, it's very interesting, because it's like you are follow a route, one route that you are following, and you know what to do, how to identify it, and so on. And also, in these days, we can say that also we have lesson learned, and for instance, get the support of our programs for the people that the youth Tony said before, the youth are focused on nets. Even they don't know how to read, how to write well. They are working in a smart tablets, a smart telephone, and so on, because it's something very intuitive, it's something very easy to do. And why we don't use all those things, all those supports to help us, the influencers, the people who the youth follow, and so on, to talk about these things,
And we have 124 youth influencers who have come together from around the world who will take what you just said, Anna Maria, so seriously. So I want to put within a framework what you just said about violence against women. So as Paloma knows, it was revolutionary in 2015 when SDG Goal 5 enumerated that violence against women was a development issue. It was absolutely a revolutionary statement to understand that violence and discrimination against women has economic costs. It's a macroeconomic issue. So just to put what you said into an economic framework, even before COVID, the global cost of violence against women was 1.5 trillion. And earlier in the afternoon, Paloma gave us statistics from the SDG report that there's a 30% hike. There is a 30% increase in the in violence against women. So that's a 30% increase in the $1.5 trillion sum we are talking about. And the intimate partner violence, that is domestic violence, costs the world 25 times more than loss of life in conflict. So I'm putting things into perspective. And it costs about 5.2% of the global GDP. So when we are talking about building back better, we have to look at the resources that we have to use in addressing violence against women in terms of building back more stable societies.
But you know, Rangita, if I may, and I'm sorry, and I'm going to give you the floor immediately. But you know, one of the things is that it's true that in some cases we don't have data. I mean, I remember when we prepared in the European Union, I'm sorry to take the floor because I'm only moderating, but I think that really is very significant. When we prepared in 1998, the first plan in the European Union, the first question was that the majority of the members, I'm talking about the European Union, and apologize if I'm going to say something that is against the sensibility of everybody, but the majority of the countries didn't have the data about what's going on with violence. The stereotypes about the situation of women suffering violence was completely unfair because we think that, I mean, poor people without resources and they need to suffer violence. And after all the research and the surveys, we realized that there are many women and girls from completely different social settings suffering violence, I mean, without any kind of protection and without any kind of protocol. So, and the majority, at that time, the majority of the countries in the European Union already have legislation against violence against women. So my point is, again, going back about this approach from the ambassador, talking about humanity. Because, I mean, you know, I think that is true what Hannah Maria mentioned. We need to work with the local leaders to know what's going on at the local level, because we cannot talk globally. Each country is different, its tradition is different, its history is different, each religion is different, each behavior in each country is different, and it's very complicated when we talk about violence to find the balance between the protection of the human being according with the setting where this human being is living. And I think that this is really the main challenge from my point of view when we talk about violence. That's why it's important really to focus in the human being, but then at the same time to have not only the law, but also political will and resources. Rangita mentioned resources, but I think that it's not only the cost, it's resources, it's also public policies, and it's also to take into account the national ownership of the approach. So, I mean, I'm sorry because I'm very passionate about that.
No,
because it's very close to my heart. But I think that, Anna Maria, I don't know if you want to finish because Ambassador Pieris is asking for the floor.
No, only a few very fast points. I think that we need to pay special attention in countries or in areas, geographical areas, where it was a conflict before and now they are in a process of transition after the transition. In my opinion, is one of the most delicate situation because the psychological effect after an armed conflict have not been part of the design of this process, you know, the balancing and how support all these people, not only the people who suffer the violence, also the perpetrators, you know, because all those people are destroyed, And another very, very fast point is that I think we have to work in the education and awareness around the family, the social close, these circles that is closer to the victims and so on, or the potential victim, but also some countries, some regions in the world has a very potential leaders in religion. We should work with these leaders because they are a real people who really affect a lot the youth, you know, and the girls and the people who start this, and also the family life. And we need to do an approach also in this type of a sphere around the person who influence, no, the youth and so on. And also as much local, in my opinion, is the program most powerful is the implementation.
Okay,
Thank
thanks
you,
a lot, Ana Maria. Ambassador, I think that you wanted to say something about that.
Just a few thoughts. I must say some very interesting thoughts actually popped up in the course of this discussion. Now, I was just thinking, I was putting my thinking cap on, and I was trying to do what are the gaps and challenges as far as I see it, if I was to capture these ideas. I think a key issue is the failure to translate female educational achievements into labor market achievements, with gender disparities recorded in labor force participation and unemployment rates. There is, as far as I see, a large concentration of economically active women in both the informal labor market and in unpaid family labor, particularly in agriculture. Labor force participation is also low. Cultural stereotypes, as you observed, as to women's roles in society and child rearing responsibilities, which is often, perhaps disproportionately, which falls on mothers, are amongst the main causes behind low female work activities, right? Mm-hmm. Households are subsequently and more prone to poverty and marginalization. Now, another area in which gender equalities are apparent is in terms of political participation, as someone said it. Although women have had the right to exercise their vote and to participate in politics in Sri Lanka as far back as in 1931, the representation of women in parliament has always been below 6%. And in comparison to an average of about 18% in the South Asian countries. So there is a need for data to enable evidence-based decision making. So then, if that is the case, what is the way forward? As far as I see it, measures must be taken to boost female labor force participation, such as the introduction of flexible working arrangements, working from home arrangements, and part-time work, providing transportation and allowances, and creating suitable avenues for females to re-enter a labor market after career breaks. You do a career break and that's it, that's gone. Though are important. Future research might be needed perhaps to determine the best types of affirmative action policies to certainly in the Sri Lankan context. Eliminating gender violence, as you quite rightly observed, calls for more awareness building of existing legislation, proper enforcement of laws, the provision of adequate support services for victims, such as crisis shelters, legal aid, counseling, and so on and so forth. The availability of national level prevalence data will also perhaps go to further strengthen and streamline responses and prevent gender violence.
So these
now,
are
I can tell you
points, Ambassador. These are such excellent points, and you're echoing what the McKinsey Global Report says about building back better in a post-COVID world. How do we now make central part-time work, flex time, and job sharing for women as a way of women re-entering and the economies. And what you said about Sri Lanka, that there is that anomaly. Sri Lanka produced the first woman head of state in the world,
Yes,
Srila
exactly.
Bandaranayake, but we still have, less 6% of women in parliament. And in the global percentage is low. It's 24% to 25%. So, corridors of power are predominantly male. And just to bring, and this is my last point, to bring everything that you said, both you and Paloma, about addressing cultural stereotypes, because that's written into the Sustainable Development Goals, the importance of addressing cultural stereotypes as a development paradigm, as a development priority. But how do we use this moment of change and this moment as an opportunity to reform our laws that are complicit in keeping those stereotypes reinforced? So to just give you two examples as lawyers and as human rights advocates, just two examples about what I call subtle discrimination. So in Argentina, the labor law allows women 90 days of maternity leave and men only 2 days of paternity leave. So you see the discrepancy. The law itself reinforces the fact that women are the primary caregivers of their family. And then my final point, because I have studied this for a book that Ana Maria and Paloma edited. I've studied the entire global landscape and identified the subtle discrimination. And students are asking us for more of these statistics. I'm going to reference them, Ana Maria's book. From Costa Rica, it provides that this is the law, ambassador, and you and I and Paloma as lawyers are very aware of the role of the law, right? The family law says husbands are the main providers and are main responsibility to provide for the family. So on the face of it, it seems, oh, positive. No, but it reinforces stereotypes. So these are the ways in which law itself is complicit in subordinating the inferior
I think it's
status of women.
important to remember that this has flowed down the centuries. The patriarchal family type flowed down all the way from Abraham, our forefather, right? Now, this is not something new, but something from Abraham himself, who actually, it came down to us. And this is a heritage that we have succeeded to due to our cultural values, our religious values, and so on and so forth. So there was if you look at it spiritually, there has been a divine plan. And that plan, unfortunately, we men and women have perhaps interpreted in a way that is not perhaps consistent with good human rights in this day and age. So we need to reinterpret, reinvent, re-energize, rethink about the way in which these old patriarchal rights are to be played out in the times to come. Remember this, I can tell you a little example. I sat with, out of the 11 judges of the Supreme Court, which I headed, I had 4 ladies who sat with me. And you believe me, they were the toughest when it came to problems with women, right? They took in fact, I took a very conciliatory view. But surprisingly, you would find, you see, in other words, there is a gap, in my view, a serious gap in the intellectual ethos, the intellectual input that's into our curriculums. So I think the whole psyche has to change. The whole psyche has to change. So really, it's a paradox, because now, for example, as you quite rightly said, the laws are made by the men. The laws are executed essentially by the men. The courts are full of men, right, who call the shots. So what's the chance that perhaps 1 or 2 women have? So now, for that to change, I think we've got to really turn the whole place upside down. Right,
yeah,
and
but
we got
Ambassador,
to turn on it.
Ambassador, if I may, I think that the last reports, at least in the West,
Yes.
meaning by the West in the European Union and also in the US and Canada, says that
Yeah.
in law schools, 58% of the students are women. The problem is that if you compare the number of students in law school and then go to the court, the majority of the persons with the leadership in the courts are men. So the point is not that we don't have women already there. So I think that the point is what happened here with the distribution of the power, because you mentioned before that we have the heritage from Abraham. I think that, I mean, the religious approach is also a very interesting one that maybe we can organize another seminar. But I think from my point of view, that the most important thing that any kind of religion or any kind of ethical or moral message can do for the humanity is to promote equality among all human beings. It doesn't matter if it's male or female. So I think that this is the point. And, you know, before, because we are almost in the last 5 minutes. So before to give the floor to Ali, because she's, I think, just collecting some questions. I don't know if Tony, you would like to add something to this, or do you prefer to wait for the questions, or?
Yeah, okay. So because of time, let's wait. There's so much to talk about, but we'll wait for the questions that Ali has put together. So go ahead.
Okay, so Ali, do we have any questions?
We do.
I know that we have a lot of them, but maybe if you can summarize maybe 2 questions, because we have exactly 5 minutes for everybody to reply. Go ahead.
Perfect. Sounds great. Yeah, we've gotten a lot of great questions. I think too, that would be a really great point for all of our panelists to touch on are what is the correct approach that should be adopted with regard to SDG 5 in order to affect change from the grassroots level? And then the other question is, how can we encourage an SDG driven education system?
Mm-hmm. So who is the volunteer now? Tony, do you like to start?
So I think we should go one by one, right? Maybe Tony can start.
Okay, I saw those. So I've been answering some of those questions in the chat, and I believe if we take the issue of the SDG driven education system, I believe that the answer really lies in the new generation, in the young generation, in the innovation that they bring, in the way they disseminate information, and the way they educate themselves right now. The information that comes out is coming out fast, it's coming out quick, and they're picking up at a different level that does not discriminate in terms of social status. And so I believe that they are best positioned to innovate and create a different level of education system for their time and for the future. And so it really, really lies up in their hands to drive this. The way we were educated 40, 50 years ago is totally different, has no bearing with what we're seeing today. And so somebody talked about blockchain technology and how that can work. So I believe blockchain technology will keep governments in order as far as budgets are concerned in spending for education. And I think that young children young adults coming in with innovation of how education is decimated today will make a big, big difference. And lastly, just to touch very, very quickly on the point of religion and going back to Abrahamic roots. Paloma, please set up a conference to talk about that. But I think it's important that we all remember that when we look at the history of religion, it changes to suit, the interpretation changes to suit the time and the era. And we're now in an era where the discussion is a lot on women. And if you go through either of the books, most of you know that you also know I'm a minister. I'm a minister as well in the church. And when you go through the books, you go through any of the holy books, you will find enough, more than enough justification in those books to stand on why equality is right. And so we're changing that topic. We're preaching different messages right now that brings equality into the perspective. So I believe that we can do the same right now to change the perception of what religion can do. Anna Maria mentioned it. I think it's important. I think religion has a part to play also in correcting the mistakes of yesterday. So it's an interesting topic, and we'll just take it like that. Thank you.
Points to address the question that Ali brought up about the role of education and the role of change. So 3 quick case studies, because I think it's important to make it very concrete. One is the point that you made, Paloma, the role of technology and innovation, and that is what you're doing, Tony. But there are other examples such as M-Pesa and M-Kopa in countries such as Kenya that is bringing mobile payment services to the least in need, such as women, persons with disabilities, and the underrepresented. So how do we scale up mobile payment systems, mobile technologies for those who are most in need, including persons with disabilities? Secondly, to the issue of education and the role of education in social change and in accelerating the SDGs, what can universities such as leading universities, some of the largest and the most distinguished universities such as ours can do to accelerate the SDGs? And I think something that Harvard University, Penn University are doing is creating online education and making it more accessible. So, creating our educational systems in a more democratized, pluralistic manner, so that it's not just for the ivory tower student, but for all. So that we can, what is taught at MIT is now made available to the student in Mongolia, in the frontier provinces of Mongolia. So how do you bridge that gap, both the gender gap, but the technology divide? So if MIT through MOOCs, through online education makes it available to the least, the one who can least access it in Mongolia, that is really the role of the SDGs and one of the ways in which the SDG goals can be met. And then finally, to the point of what the ambassador has said, and I think it's so important as a male leader to address these issues and to have male leaders joining us in addressing not only gender inequality, but also the humility that you bring, Ambassador, to this issue by acknowledging the role that patriarchy has played in reinforcing stereotypes. And another male leader, the current dean of Harvard Business School, made a public apology to the women of Harvard Business School. In 2014, he said, "I apologize on behalf of the school. The school owed its women better, and I promise I will do better." So if male leaders can start on the premise of humility, of acknowledging the wrongs of the past and how we can do better, I think it is one, what I would say, a very quick and possible way, which doesn't call for money or resources, but calls for political will to correct this situation. Thank you.
Okay, Rangita. Ana Maria,
Okay.
1 minute, and the ambassador another minute.
Only just to don't create a new debate, but I would like to all the students or the person that are today with us say thank you very much to being with us, and I would like to recommend 2 programs that, in my opinion, are one of the more successful to do the awareness and for everybody about these topics. One of the most successful, it was one that the UN Women, the name is He for She. I think it was fantastic. I will say to everybody to check it. And another one was and is actually Cities Free from Violence Against Women and Girls. Both are clear, concrete examples about awareness, education, partnership, integration, public and private, the small shop with the police in order to identify the dark street, the dark areas. I will say that it's very interesting to see these concrete 2 actions, very important programs to fight against the violence.
Thanks a lot, Ana Maria. Ambassador?
Yes, right. I would like to actually ask our younger friends who are at the threshold of crossing from their young world to the adult world to cling to these values like gold, sleep with them, live with them. because my experience has been that they lose it the moment they get into this adult world, and all that idealism vanishes through the window. I will really ask, therefore, hold on to them, cling on to them, live with them, live through life with them. See yourself in the other. See yourself in the other, in the spirit of perhaps Ubuntu, perhaps in South Africa. See yourself in the other, so that we can carry this intergenerational trust that has been bestowed on each one of us, so that when we hand over the baton, the few of us, that the baton won't be dropped on the way, and it will be carried through, so that the world will be a better place that we can live in, where there'll be gender equality of a better quality, if not a completely fine one. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And just last words to say again, thank you to everybody for participating in these conversations during the whole week. I think that it was a very intense week. Rangita and UNITAR and myself follow everything here, try to do our best really to have a conversation where you can learn. I hope that the course was really helpful for everybody, and also an opportunity to think, to learn, also to discuss, to see how to improve, how to learn more. So I think that Rangita, myself, of course, with UNITAR, will try to make our self-survey and try to see how can we improve the whole thing, and how can we work for the future. But I would like, of course, to thank all of you, to thank you all the panelists. I think that today we have 3 wonderful guests with us, and during the whole week, it was a very, very interesting conversation. But I want also to say thank you mainly to Rangita. That was my twin and my sister preparing the course, and with all the work that she did with the design and the concept note, the initial concept note that we discussed. So thank you so much, Rangita, for all your efforts. And for sure, thank you to the UNITAR team, that I think that they did a very silent but very important work. So, that's for you. Thank you so much, everybody. And I hope that we can repeat again this conversation in the near future. So
thank you, Paloma.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Paloma. Thank you, Rangita.
But I want to thank Ambassador Pires, because you brought to us that humanist spirit, the vision of humanity, and what it is to bring a humanist vision to this. And you ended up with invoking the Ubuntu principles, which is about bringing the community together. And Tony, I think Ubuntu is something that resonates with you, and it is really what makes us human. So it is deeply a humanist program. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you to all of our wonderful visionaries, and thank you, Paloma, my kindred soul and my sister, and most of all to the next generation of leaders and diplomats. The charge is yours to build back.
It's yours. Absolutely.
Bye.
God bless you all. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Anna Marie,
Thank you so
take
much,
care.
everyone.
Thank you.
Gratitude. Thank you.